Gamma Station, this is Fermion RSO. Unconfirmed report of an in-system split space rupture.
Impossible. Check your source.
Reading multiple pings below the orbital defense grid.
Oh, this can't be happening.
There's no mistake. It's them.
Winter contingency has been declared. All units are mobilized and ready.
This is Sierra 320. Prep for combat insertion.
What the hell was that? We're coming in hot. Hold on. We just lost our bird.
Oh my god. What the hell is happening down there? Getting just dropped off my map.
Overrun. We'll hold this position as long as we can.
I need you in that fight, Noble One. Noble One, come in. Noble One, do you read me?
To many people, humanity is viewed as a monster. A perpetual blight on the world that Mother Nature should have ground into the dust back into the Stone Age. Now, most people, when they say such things, are speaking in hyperbole, using exaggeration and often humor to draw attention to issues. Despite the blustering of several online personalities, no one save the deranged would actually advocate for literal genocide of the human race. Even those who view humanity in the bleakest fashion would hesitate to orchestrate our complete destruction. But what if all the talk wasn't exaggeration? What if there was an entity, an organization, that wanted to destroy humanity as a species, not because of what we did, or in a calculating bid for resources? What if a people hated humanity so much that they viewed our mere existence as a sin, a heresy? On today's Lark's Lamentations, we look at such an entity. We do the prophet's work. We look at Halo's covenant. But before you can understand the covenant, you must understand the history of Halo as a franchise. Millions of years ago, the galaxy was dominated by an ancient species known to us as the Forerunners. The Forerunners would dominate the galaxy, bending the stars to their will. Their constructions and technology was so advanced that to the uneducated, it would seem almost divine. For untold centuries, the Forerunner would enjoy their position as the dominant race in the galaxy. The other spacefaring species could not hold a candle to the magnificence of their empire. How could they? The Forerunner are the firstborn children of the eldritch seeders of life in the Milky Way galaxy, the Precursors. See, these Precursors had smiled on the Forerunners. They were to hold the mantle of responsibility, the duty to protect the galaxy and all the species that inhabited it. However, over time, the Precursors withdrew the mantle from the Forerunners. Why? We do not know. Were the Forerunners perhaps too harsh as stewards of the galaxy? Did their arrogance irritate the Precursors? Or was the mantle never truly there to begin with? What we do know is that the Precursors' new favorite child was humanity. The Forerunners could not stand this decision, and they rebelled against their creators, eradicating them from the galaxy. Millions of years passed, and the question of humanity came up again. The humans were getting too numerous, and the Forerunner territory and human territory were butting up against each other more and more. What's more, the Forerunner started hearing rumors that amongst the humans some were claiming that they should hold the mantle. This meant war. The Forerunner campaigned to wipe out humanity's empire. Their worlds were occupied, and any evidence of their civilization was burned away. After 1,000 years of war, humanity would be reduced to one world, their homeworld, Earth. And as a final insult, humanity would be devolved back into the Stone Age. The Forerunners, though greatly weakened from the war, could rest safely that the galaxy and mantle were safe. Or so they thought. After humanity's defeat, the Forerunners discovered what caused humanity's erratic behavior in the first place. See, humanity was fighting another enemy. The Flood, a parasitic race birthed from the remains of the Precursors, had been swarming human worlds, causing humanity to flee to other systems, while the bulk of their military fought the Flood. But the Flood seemed such a small issue to the Forerunners at the time. It was weak, and beyond notice for now. But 10,000 years later, the Flood started to appear on Forerunner worlds. The Forerunners at first tried to quarantine it, treating it like a disease. Only then did they realize it was too late. The Forerunners finally decided to declare war on it centuries after the conflict began. For 3,000 years, the Forerunners tried to beat back the Flood, and for 3,000 years the Flood grew stronger. Ships infested, machines corrupted, worlds consumed. The Forerunner knew all was lost. With heavy hearts, the Forerunners pulled the last of their resources to create the Halo Arrays. These halos would eradicate all life in the galaxy and deprive the Flood of its food, starving it into extinction. Once the Flood was gone, the AI on the Ark would reseed the galaxy with life, with one notable exception: the Forerunners themselves. In their eyes, the galaxy's fall to the Flood was their failure. Because of this, the Forerunners believed that they deserved to die off.
Waste.
We deserve to be forgotten.
Perhaps?
In an ironic twist of fate, their last act was to pass the mantle on to humanity, as the precursors had always intended. And 97,000 years ago, the Forerunner assigned their fate and passed into history.
History became legend. Legend became myth.
Oh wait, sorry, is that the wrong franchise? Whoops! Alright, now that that's out of the way, let's break down the actual Covenant. After the firing of the rings, one of the many species to be reseeded into the galaxy was the Sanshayum, who grew up in a homeworld rich with Forerunner artifacts. The early Sanshayum began to view technology as divine and their architects as gods. This access to such advanced tech led the Sanshayum to develop faster than most other species in the galaxy. But an issue arose out of how to deal with Forerunner tech. The Sanshayum had two schools of thought on how to deal with the tech. One, leave it alone, it's holy, or two, the gods left it here for a reason, piss off and let me do my thing. This, of course, led to war, as most things will. The War of the Wills, ironically, is what it's to be called. The war ended up with the Reformists figuring out how to work a Forerunner dreadnought and taking off from the planet and taking a chunk of said planet with it, leaving the Stoics to have the planet, but the Reformists get the dreadnought. Anyway, this dreadnought and chunk would go on to form the basis for the Covenant capital city, High Charity. It is here that the Reformist Sanshayum would go on to explore the galaxy in their new, mobile, holy city. Along the way, in their travels, they came across the Hurok, or the Huragok. Some of these names are hard for me, please forgive me. However, these Huragok, for ease of, speaking, we'll call them engineers. See, the Huragok were created by the Forerunners as biological engineers. Think those green things from the Citadel on Mass Effect? Yeah, same things, but they can float. Since the engineers are incredibly peaceful, the Sanshayum just kind of kept them around, taming them in the process, and they had helped to reverse engineer Forerunner tech, so they were a benefit and peaceful, so why not have them around? But fast forward to 938 BC, the Sanshayum, in their search for more artifacts, land on Elgathon, a planet in the middle of nowhere. But it had Forerunner tech on it, so it was of interest to the Sanshayum. However, when they landed, they found that the planet was actually already inhabited by another alien race living inside of a lot of the relics. The Sangheli. Now, these guys are arguably the most iconic aliens in the Halo series, and you're about to see why. The Sanshayum decided it would be best to try and negotiate with this new species. The two races awkwardly tried to communicate with each other. Things started to perk up when they both realized they worshipped the Forerunners. Huzzah! Then things turned sour when the same disagreement as the War of the Wills came up. The Sangheli viewed messing with Forerunner construct as heresy, and the Sanshayum wanted to reverse engineer them.
I feel like we've been here before. Have we been here before?
So the Arbiter at the time decapitated the Sanshayum envoys. Yeah, what followed next was an 84-year-long interstellar conflict. This is the War of Beginnings. During the war, you had the Sangheli try and fail to overcome High Charity. While the Sanshayum destroyed Sangheli colonies while getting destroyed anytime they actually had to land forces on the ground.
Finally!
This was a long and grueling fight. The San'Shyuum had better tech, but the Sangheili were better fighters. As the war drew to a close, and the Sangheili homeworld Sanghelios was threatened, and the Sangheili were forced to use Forerunner tech to fight as well. Both sides eventually realized further fighting was pointless and would only lead to their own mutual destruction. So peace was declared and both societies merged and formed the Covenant, each race taking on new roles. The Sangheili would lead the Covenant's military as the newly titled elites, while the San'Shyuum would be in charge of theology as the prophets. Both would run the government with 200 elite commanders and prophets serving on the High Council. The council itself would be led by 3 hierarchs, all of which would be prophets. Now here comes the wacky part of the hierarchs. See, it's how they're decided. The Covenant divides its calendar into ages. Each age has its own 3 hierarchs. And new ages are determined by a Forerunner AI, who the prophets view as an oracle. Once the oracle's messages are interpreted, 3 prophets will come forward and make the case that for a new age, and the council will vote them in as the new hierarchs or kick them out of the room. Now, if for whatever reason you can't get an oracle to change the age, that's okay, just bribe people into voting for a change in age. Regardless of government systems, let's get back to progression. The newly unified Covenant set out to explore and settle the galaxy, looking for Forerunner tech, along the way eventually coming across the Lagoko worms found around the moons of Tay. Unfortunately, the worms were eating Forerunner artifacts and were labeled for extermination. This went incredibly poorly. Yeah, these worms are not just mud munchers, they're also very intelligent creatures and proved they were not to be trifled with. The Lagoko could merge together to form large constructs so effective in fighting that the Covenant lost most ground engagements. Starting to notice a trend here? Eventually, an Arbiter was called in to deal with the worms. The Arbiter made the bold suggestion of bringing the worms into the Covenant. 1, because, well, they were useful fighters, and 2, if they wanted to truly get rid of them, it would mean glassing the relics the Covenant wanted so much. The Prophets and the Lagoko agreed that the worms could join the Covenant forces, and so they did, as the newly branded Hunters. Fast forward a few millennia to the 12th century AD, the Covenant became in contact with some spacefaring bugs called the Yaname. Now, war broke out almost immediately, with ground combat again going poorly for the Covenant just due to the sheer numbers that the Yaname could produce. Keep in mind, these are kind of like ants or bees. They have queens, and the rest are typically drones. Yeah, think kind of, Starship Trooper bugs. That's kind of what we're dealing with here, except more locusty. It makes sense in context. Thankfully, one of the Covenant found a way to communicate, and they offered a place for the Yaname in the Covenant hierarchy to avoid a longer war. Thus, the Yaname joined and became the aptly named drones, and sometimes tech support of the Covenant. Alright, so let's go over the list. We got our Ender's Game bugs, sentient earthworms. Feels like we're missing something here. Ah, of course, space pirates. You know what? Make them dinosaurs. In the 14th century, the Covenant came across the Kig-Yar, who were excellent smugglers and pirates. When the two first met, the Kig-Yar attacked the Covenant fleet when it came into their system, only for the Kig-Yar to learn what the term shock and awe meant. Eventually, the Kig-Yar made a deal to work for the Covenant and keep their pirate lifestyle, because the other option was be annihilated. And, it's a pirate's life for me. Now, this here is an interesting union. See, the newly dubbed Jackals didn't join the Covenant for religious reasons. They joined for profit. No, not that profit. Those profits. The booty. This will become an issue later. Anyway, that's nice, but we need some tragedy here. The list needs something more. After all, in space, no one can hear you cry. We need some tragedy. Really? This goofy thing? It breathes farts, for Pete's sake. How am I supposed to feel bad for this? Oh, good lord. Yeah, in the 22nd century AD, the Covenant came across the Ungoi, who were barely holding together in the Industrial Age. The Covenant just immediately subjugated them and forced them into serve as slave labor and cannon fodder for the Covenant. There was no treaty, no mutual understanding, just conquest and enslavement. The Grunts, as they were now called, would eventually come around to the Covenant religion after their own culture was eradicated and destroyed. Oh, and we're not done! These guys were commonly used in warfare as meat shields. Literally, they were given no guns and used to absorb fire. They are the lowest members of the Covenant, and they suffered this ill treatment for over 300 years. Finally, they lost it when the Jackals started to sterilize them and the Prophets couldn't be bothered to do anything about it. This led to a massive rebellion, to which an Arbiter had to put down by glassing half of the Ungoi home planet. Thankfully, the Grunts gained some respect in the eyes of the elites, who finally allowed them to carry weapons into combat. They're still fourth-class citizens and cannon fodder, though, but and that's not enough. Here's another dose of depression for you. If the Covenant hadn't found them, when they did, it's possible they might have died off due to an ecological collapse on their planet. I need a moment.
I'm sorry, little one.
Okay, we're back. We're fine now. It's all good. Okay, now this alien amalgamation is getting pretty big. But you know, I'm still missing something. A certain je ne sais quoi. Where are our big, tough, stupid aliens? We get those and we should be all set. Ah, space gorillas. Perfect. In the 25th century, the Covenant happened to come across the Jiralhane, who had almost nuked themselves into oblivion. See, the Jiralhane have the policy of shoot first and forget what questions needed to be asked later. They were large, tough, and built like tanks and blindly followed orders. The Prophet liked the cut of their jib, and they went to war to bring them into the Covenant with a great degree of success, though the elites were not happy with these brutes, as they were no longer the most physically imposing members of the Covenant. But there's more to that beef later than just a measuring contest. Alright, now all our member races are here. We can finally talk about what you are all actually here for. The Covenant's interaction with humanity. The Covenant's first contact, ironically, didn't involve Forerunner artifacts. Don't worry, they become important later. It actually started with the Jackals finding human ships around the human colony of Harvest and started to raid them for plunder. Thinking that the attacks were separatist raiding parties, because at the time the United Nations Space Command was having a problem with insurrections, or was what they called innies. So the UNSC set up a trap expecting to deal with humans, only to actually wind up finding themselves shooting at aliens. The discovery of alien life shocked the humans on Harvest, but humanity quickly tried to meet with the Covenant and open up some diplomatic ties. The Covenant's closest vassal was a brute ship sent to claim the many relics their scanners picked up on Harvest. When the human governor and the Covenant envoys meeting didn't go well, both sides had trouble understanding each other. And the humans couldn't grasp that the Covenant just wanted Forerunner artifacts. They weren't interested in fruit, dude. Seriously. No, actually read Contact Harvest, like the human governor tries to offer produce. But then again, Harvest is an agriculture world, so I guess we can't be too surprised. Regardless, there were no Forerunner artifacts there for them to actually hand over, or at least none that they knew of. Of course, thanks to a spooked grunt, the meeting wound up a firefight. Great job, guys. I feel bad for you, but try not to be morons. Anyway, but before we get into the further fighting, we need to address those Forerunner artifacts that the brutes were after. The Covenant scanners didn't pick up Forerunner artifacts, and two prophets, the Minister of Fortitude and the Vice Minister of Tranquility, wanted to use these supposed dots on a map to try and justify them getting cooler names, because the ones that currently had sucked, and so they could change in age and become and rise to the rank of hierarchs. So they went to High Charity's AI/Oracle to help them get a seal of approval, only for the AI to say, yeah, those aren't relics on the map. Those are reclaimers. After both of the prophets recovered from that panic attack, they jumped to the immediate wrong conclusion. Don't worry, they're used to that. The prophets in question wrongly assumed that humans were forerunners that were left behind when the Halo rings were fired. This is a massive issue for the Forerunner religion. The whole point of the Covenant is not just to worship the Forerunners as gods, but to replicate their so-called Great Journey with the firing of the Halo rings. The Covenant believes that firing the Halo rings sent the Forerunners to paradise, and that firing them again will elevate the faithful to godhood and to paradise. If the Great Journey hypothetically didn't pick up all the Forerunners, that calls the religion into question, and furthermore calls the prophets' authority into question, and if the prophets lose their authority, it would shake the Covenant to its core.
My whole life is a lie!
So the prophets, with heavy hearts, decided to alert the council so that the truth could enlighten the races of the Covenant, to reform the theology of, and who am I kidding, they claimed humanity destroyed the relics on Harvest, and that they were heretics and abominations that needed to be exterminated. Ah, predictability. Oh, and by the way, these two prophets would go on to become the prophet of truth and regret, respectively. Regardless, war was on, and only genocide would save the Covenant, according to the new hierarchs. Thus began the Human Covenant War. Now, any fan of the Halo series can tell you how the Human Covenant War goes. The humans, despite putting up a fierce fight, did very poorly for the majority of the war. Though humanity would have home field advantage, they couldn't overcome the vast technological difference. Space battles almost always went for the Covenant. Only on rare occasions did the UNSC get the upper hand, and was due to large numerical superiority and clever tactics. But even then, these were Pyrrhic victories, with humanity taking massive casualties. On the ground, however, things went a little differently. Humanity could put up an effective resistance on the planet's surface. This, however, was little comfort, as in some battles, the Covenant wouldn't even bother to land troops, as they would just destroy humanity's naval presence, and then they would glass the planet from space. The Covenant would typically only engage in ground combat if there were Forerunner artifacts on the planet, or at least they believed there were Forerunner artifacts on the planet. As the war dragged on, the Covenant glassed almost all human outer colonies, facing only two real difficulties: the Spartan super soldiers, who had gained such a fierce reputation that they were labeled as demons by the Covenant, and then there was Admiral Cole. And Admiral Cole bamboozled the Covenant on numerous occasions, even to the point of wrecking the Covenant fleet by detonating a gas giant and turning it into a brown dwarf. Seriously, Cole's role in humanity's survival cannot be overstated. He is up there with Master Chief as saviors to humanity goes. Despite some minor victories here and there, it was clear humanity was losing, and everyone knew it. Yet in the 27th year of the war came the greatest loss to humanity: the fall of Reach. Reach was one of humanity's greatest strongholds, second only to Earth in terms of military importance. On July 3rd, 2552, the Covenant found Reach, and it went downhill from there. Despite the best efforts of the UNSC, Reach was glassed and the bulk of the UNSC military capabilities were neutralized. This was another Covenant victory, but a costly one. Even though the Covenant again enjoyed technical superiority, the cost of taking Reach was high. Perhaps too high. Humanity may not have been able to tell, but the Covenant military was starting to wear down. Sure, they had the upper hand, but the war with humanity was becoming one of the most costly in the Covenant's history. And one question kept flaring up in the minds of the elites: why? What was the point of going through all the trouble? Humanity may need to pay for the destruction of the relics, but was genocide really necessary? Other members of the Covenant had damaged Forerunner relics in the past, but they were still offered a chance to join. Why not humanity? Each time human forces were encountered, the elites were impressed by the martial prowess of humanity. Their bravery in combat surely deserved an offer to join, but each time the elites inquired to the prophets, their concerns were brushed aside, and each time doubts filled the elites' minds even more. Despite doubts and frustrations, though, this didn't stop the elites from continuing the war with humanity, chasing them to the farthest and most unlikely places of the galaxy, even to Halo. One of the ships that fled the fall of Reach, the Pillar of Autumn, blindly jumped to one of the Halo installations with the Covenant fleet hot on their tails. Both sides immediately landed on Halo. The Covenant for religious reasons, and the UNSC because, well, they were kind of shot down. For the Covenant, this was a monumentous occasion. They had found one of the sacred rings, but it was now infested with humans, and even worse, due to the sacred nature of the rings, they couldn't use their air/space superiority to full effect, for fear of damaging the relics. Because of this, the UNSC put up a powerful resistance restrained by nothing. But during the fighting, the Covenant accidentally let loose the Flood, which divided their forces even further. Then, to make matters worse for the Covenant, the Spartan detonated the remains of the Pillar of Autumn, destroying the Halo ring. This was the greatest sacrilege the Covenant could possibly imagine. The Covenant High Council, when they heard, were so livid they took the commanding officer, Thel-Fadim, and had him sentenced to death for heresy. But considering Thel-Fadim was actually one of the best military minds Covenant had to offer, the Prophet of Truth, in one of his few good decisions, decided to stay the execution and have Thel-Fadim become the next arbiter. But more on that later. The Prophet of Mercy just so happened to find Earth. This is a major issue for both parties. For the UNSC for obvious reasons. But for the Prophet of Mercy, it's bad for him because he came to find Forerunner artifacts. He had no idea he was headed directly for humanity's homeworld, and he only had a small escort fleet. Regardless, the Prophet's ships punched through and warped to another Halo, inadvertently bringing a few UNSC forces along with them, and one of those forces was Master Chief.
Do you even know how fucked you are?
You know how this song and dance goes.
Clobbering time!
One dead prophet later, Truth and Regret are very upset at the loss of one of their brothers, but it gave them an opportunity to replace the honor guard of the Covenant with brutes rather than elites. All according to plan. Now, the elites were understandably upset by this, but Truth didn't care. He had distrusted the elites for a long time, as many prophets had before him, which is going to lead him to pull one of the dumbest moves in the history of the Covenant. Truth ordered the extermination of the elites. I want to put how dumb this decision was in context. With all that is going on, the UNSC is still putting up a fierce resistance, the Flood has resurfaced, the Covenant has just found the location of the Ark and is making final preparations for the Great Journey, and now there's starting to be some doubts among the Great Journey and some signs of heresy. This is the absolute worst time to start a purge. But you know what? Let's see, how did it go for you, Truth? Oh, that's a full-blown civil war. All over Covenant space, too. Oh, and it looks like the elites and humanity have allied with each other, and, well, just good job, you dumbass. It's not like this situation could get much worse. Oh, right, I forgot about you. Well, that's 2 down, 1 to go.
Let him be. The great journey waits for no one.
I mean, you know, Tardis, you could still save him. He's not... Okay. Let the bodies hit the floor, I guess. Anyway, the Human Elite Alliance and the Covenant fleet met at the Ark to have one last epic battle to stop Truth from firing all of the rings at once. But the combined forces led by the Arbiter and Master Chief find and are able to finally kill Truth.
The moment of salvation is at hand.
It will not last.
Your kind never believed in the promise of the sacred ring.
Lies for the weak, beacons for the deluded. I will have my revenge. On a prophet, not a plague.
My feet tread the path. I shall become a god.
You will be food, nothing more.
No! Truth! The voice of the Covenant!
So, you must be silenced.
With the death of the last hierarch, the Covenant was effectively dissolved. Thus ends a major interstellar empire. Oh, and don't worry, Master Chief and Arbiter clapped the Flood as well. Huzzah! Well, that is a long story, but a good one. So what can I say about the Covenant? They're one of my favorite villain factions of all time. They are also very well written as well as complex, along with being incredibly unique. In a genre filled with galactic empires and evil machine races, it's kind of refreshing to see a theocracy. I'll be honest, I find them more compelling villain than the Flood. Just not as scary. But enough gushing. We have flaws to talk about. The Covenant has the following overreaching flaws. 1, an over-reliance on technology. 2, technological stagnation. 3, strict religious interpretation. And 4, unequal membership. Let's look into each one of those problems. First, the tech. On multiple occasions in multiple wars, the Covenant would win the day, but with grievous casualties, even to the point where they almost lost wars. In the Human Covenant War, when they did have to engage on ground battles, they often lost more than humanity. If the Covenant wanted to be more effective in war, they would need to train more in ground combat, and ditch the honor charges, man. I'm looking at you, elites. Oh, and brutes, your berserker charges are really stupid, and the grunts, your suicide tactic. You know, I'm seeing a lot of room for improvement here. But that's just the beginning of our problems. We also have technological stagnation. Despite how much they rely on said technology, it's very stagnant. If you look at the Covenant from their inception to the Covenant at the end in the Human Covenant War, technology hasn't improved that great a deal. Their tech is a crude imitation of Forerunner tech, but that's all it is. Imitation. There is no innovation or invention, only imitation. And while their imitated tech is good, no question, the Covenant would do well to try and experiment to improve. But it's oddly alien to their psychology. Funny enough, the most powerful weapon used in the war was humanity's Nova Bomb, which was developed over the course of the war. Oh, by the way, it accidentally destroyed a Covenant fleet and colony because the Covenant disarmed it, brought it back, and tried to investigate it, and an engineer accidentally turned it on next to a Covenant fleet and homeworld. Yeah. Oh, and it left this little recording, which I just have to read. This is the prototype Nova Bomb, 9 fusion warheads encased in lithium tritride armor. When detonated, it compresses its fissionable material to neutron star density, boosting the thermonuclear yield 100-fold. I am Vice Admiral Danforth Whitcomb, temporarily in command of the UNSC military base Reach. To you Covenant uglies that might be listening, you have a few seconds to pray to your damned heathen gods. Y'all have a nice day in hell. Which leads me to my next issue, and one of the largest, is the religious interpretation. The whole Great Journey comes from a misinterpretation. The Great Journey the Forerunners referred to was actually a self-imposed exile, but in their pursuit of this misinterpretation, they would actually wind up killing everyone in the galaxy. If the Covenant had actually debated with each other more, or listened to the Oracle more clearly, they would know that firing the Halo rings was a bad idea. Also, think if the Prophet of Truth had taken a nanosecond when he had found out that humanity was labeled as reclaimers, he might have been able to come and try to find some other explanation for their presence other than just being left behind Forerunners. Plus, that raises another issue. Humanity's existence as reclaimers sheds down on the Great Journey, at least in the mind of Truth and Regret. So if the prophets know that the Great Journey can't be exactly what they thought, why on earth would they continue to go through with it? It's just a weird thought. Seriously though, the Covenant might have been able to survive if they went through some reformation where they took less emphasis, where they changed emphasis on the Great Journey being an actual physical concept, and perhaps maybe more of a spiritual one. Finally, the biggest problem with the Covenant is the unequal treatment amongst its member races. The Covenant's strict hierarchy led to numerous problems, unrest, revolts, and all. To make matters worse, many of the Covenant races are not there because they enjoy the Covenant religion. It's because they were forced there or they're there for some other benefit. Honestly, the only members of the Covenant who believed in the Great Journey are the prophets, the elites, the brutes, and some of the grunts. If the Covenant had allowed equal membership in the Union and had allowed for proper minds and meritocracy so the right minds could rise to the top, the Covenant probably would have been stronger, not to mention they would have been more unified, and they would have put up far more effective fighting forces, and heck, they may not have even gotten into a lot of the wars that they initially had to fight so often and so frequently. But I'm not going to lie. I'm not too upset with the Covenant. Because most of the problems that they have come from good writing. There might be a few plot holes here or there, but the Covenant, in my opinion, is incredibly well written. They are an incredibly fascinating villain to go up against. And I think that's part of the reason that my favorite Halo game to date is Halo Reach, because it puts the Human Covenant war in proper perspective. There's no real hope or idea of that, we're going to pull one last Hail Mary and save the day. You're fighting a losing battle. This is a rearguard action at best. And you have to continue to look as an alien race hell-bent on your destruction stops at nothing, and no amount of casualties, conversations, or dialogue, or pleas for forgiveness will stop them. And your world, just like every other before it, will be glassed. But I'm afraid it ends there, though, because the Covenant died with truth. But though our favorite space theocracy is now dead, I say that the Covenant actually put us on a journey. One might even call it great. And with that, we're going to call it here. Hope you enjoyed what you listened to. If you have anything else you want to add about the Covenant that makes them unique in your eyes, tell me down below. If I got anything wrong, also, please make sure you keep me informed. Can never learn too much. Alright, gentlemen, I'll see you in the next one.